A new conflict over the weekend has defense stocks bouncing higher, but they're not the only sector rising with global tensions. The critical components behind these defense companies are also getting renewed interest right now. Joining us to talk more about the rare earth mining story behind these defense companies is Tim Johnston with REalloys, a newly public company in the rare earth mining story in North America. Tim, so great to have an engineer and an expert in this field on, especially this week, as this story has gotten so much renewed interest with all of the geopolitical attention on defense right now. We talked about rare earth stocks on this channel before. These stocks all saw a huge surge last year, and we know there's a lot of investment coming from the U.S. government on bringing this rare earth mining supply chain to North America. But again, the timing right now is getting renewed interest in a lot of the rare earth mining stocks because they do play that critical role in defense. Can you explain that a little more?
What a lot of people don't realize is that the rare earths that we talk about in terms of REalloys are the enabling components that go into the components that we use for a whole range of defense and technology applications. Without these components, you simply can't make those instruments perform the way you want them to perform, particularly when we're talking about high-performance magnets that go into things like drones and robotics. They're critically important to actually making those things work in the first place.
Yeah, the rare earths we're talking about today specifically are magnets, and these are the things, you just mentioned a couple of them, but you think about all of the stocks we talk about on this channel. We talk about drone stocks often. We talk about battery stocks. We talk about lots of different areas of defense, the up-and-coming robotics boom of the defense story. All of those things depend on magnets. Just go into detail a little bit more, Tim, on all of the different facets of defense that rely on the magnets you're mining.
In particular, what we focus on is the heavy rare earths. And so when you're talking about magnets, these are the high-performance, high-temperature magnets that are used in everything from fighter jets to submarines to drones, basically anything that has an application with a slightly elevated temperature that still needs an electric motor or electric drive or some particular sensory equipment that relies on magnets. They use these components in order to make them work. Without them, you simply wouldn't have the magnetic properties which these components rely on to operate.
Yeah, it really is a component in so many things, not just defense, but there's a long list of products, regular household products that all rely on these kind of rare earth minerals to be produced. So I want to talk a little bit. We've talked about rare earth stocks on the channel before, like I mentioned, but we've never really gotten into the nitty-gritty. There are many different kinds of rare earth minerals out there, and they all do different things. So I want to talk about, without getting too nitty-gritty or technical here, I want you to talk about what REalloys produces specifically and why what you're doing at REalloys is so closely tied to defense more than some of the other rare earth mining companies out there.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I just previously mentioned, one of the things that we focus on is heavy rare earth elements for magnets. And so when we talk about rare earths for magnets, we really distinguish into two key baskets: lights and heavies. The lights go into permanent magnets that are used in what I would call low-tech applications. These are your home appliances, your basic electric vehicles. Those sort of applications rely on these light rare earths. However, without the heavy rare earths, you can't actually operate those devices at higher temperatures in more extreme environments, which we find in the defense sector. So that's why the heavy rare earths, they become the enabling component for these components to actually work in the conditions that they're required, whether or not that's on the battlefield, whether or not that's required, just simply because, their application, because of the high-tech use of them, requires a higher operating temperature. Then you need to start to transition into these heavy rare earths as well.
So interesting, and also goes to show that there's a ton of demand in every sector for the rare earth materials that your company and many others are looking into right now. We're going to get into in this video talking about how much demand there is for these rare earth materials. We're going to talk a little bit about where they're currently coming from and how the supply chain is shifting and the focus is shifting to getting more of these materials domestically, at least in North America. And that's where your company comes into. So we're going to cover a lot in this video. And then looking at your company stock in particular, that's getting a lot of interest right now from investors. Let's get back into the story of where these rare earth magnets are currently coming from. Where in the world are most of these produced right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, this is a Chinese dominated story. And this is why developing out a North American supply chain is so critically important. Today, approximately 70% of all rare earths are mined from Chinese sources, but more than 90% of all rare earths today are actually refined and separated in China. And when you're talking about heavy rare earths, 100% of all heavy rare earths today are metallized. That's the final step in the manufacturing process for heavy rare earth metals, is done in China. And so that's why when we're talking about these defense applications and the tensions that exist in the world today, from a geopolitical standpoint, it's so critically important that we look for diversification away from China and that reliance. Because as I was saying earlier, that dependency on those heavy rare earth metals is actually the enabler. So you take that away, China shuts down supply, and then all of a sudden you can't build those things that you need for defense technology and really important infrastructure.
Yeah, and that is why we're seeing so much attention and really so much investment going into making the mining of these materials, again, more domestic, more North American, something that we have some more control over. Talk about just how much investment we're seeing in this whole sector. Again, we talked about other companies on this channel before that are in this rare earth sector, and we've seen some of that drive coming from the US and other North American countries. But give investors a better picture of how much investment and interest is going into this buildup of this North American supply.
Yeah, absolutely. So the government, the US government in particular, has already announced tens of billions of dollars worth of investment going through various different programs to enable a North American allied supply chain of rare earth materials. Effectively, we're 30 years behind the Chinese in North America when it comes to producing rare earths, and therefore we have a lot of catch up that needs to happen. We're seeing investment right across the board, and we can break it up into a few key components. Those who mine and produce the raw materials from a rare earth perspective, to those who refine and separate them, turning those raw materials into refined products, and then ultimately magnet manufacturing. And there is capital being raised and developed, and to be frank, supported by the government, in particular the U.S. government, for the supply of each of those sectors today.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about your company in particular. We've seen the U.S. governor partner with some other specific rare earth mining companies. Where does REalloys come into the story, and where are you looking at building up the manufacturing supply chain in North America?
REalloys has a very unique strategy. Our strategy is built on where we see the biggest need in the industry, and that's on the separation and refining of rare earths. So we have partnered with a Canadian organization called the SRC, or the Saskatchewan Research Council, who have built a commercial facility in Saskatoon for the separation and refining of rare earths from a variety of different mineral feedstocks. And that's a really important point. We're not focused on the development of just one particular type of resource. In fact, we can take materials from a wide range of sources. And for the first 5 years of production, we'll be taking materials from Brazil, South Africa, and North America, refining them in Canada, and then ultimately turning them into metals in our facility in Ohio. One of the things that we did, in addition to partnering with the SRC on the refining and separation side, is we acquired a group in Ohio, in Euclid, Ohio, called PMTCM. And here we have over 2 decades of experience producing specialty metals, including rare earths, for the DLA, the Defense Logistics Agency, which includes the DOW, the DOE, and NASA. And what we've been able to do is combine those components to develop that North American supply chain, which will ultimately allow us to produce magnets. One of the really interesting things about what we're doing and our strategy here and bringing these assets together is that we'll be first to market with heavy rare earths in North America at the end of this year. And why that's really important is because the US has legislative requirements starting in 2027 under Title 50 that requires the sourcing of these materials to come from allied sources, in particular North American sources. And so our ability to deliver those materials to the market has enabled us to develop some really strong partnerships within the US government. And that too has been, memorialized with some of the great people that we've had, involved in the business. So we've recently had Stephen Dumont, who is the CEO of GM Defense. He's joined our board as the chair of the board. We've had General Jack Keane. He's a retired four-star general, key advisor to the Trump administration, who recently joined our board. And we have a great group of people around us that are making this possible because they see the importance of that North American supply and really diversifying away from the reliance on China for these materials.
And both of those things are why your company is already securing more future contracts, including one that was really just announced.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this morning we announced once again that we've won another contract through the DLA for the supply of samarium and gadolinium, which are two critical components for rare earths that the defense requires. And so this goes back to our long operating history as an organization in producing specialty materials for the defense and associated agencies that we work with on a daily basis.
Yeah, so you're working with multiple defense agencies every day. You're securing more of those future contracts already, and you are on track to have your mining and processing facilities fully operational yet this year. Those are all strong signs of high momentum for your company, but that's not necessarily showing up in your stock story. Right now, the ticker symbol is ALOY, and the stock story looks different than what a lot of investors might be familiar with. That's because you were such a newly public company. So explain a little bit more about the unique stock story behind your company.
REalloys has been a private company up until about a week ago. We've been developing this strategy, bringing together these partnerships, and ultimately building out this supply chain ahead of coming to the public markets. And so we're very happy to announce that we completed a merger with a group called BLBX on the NASDAQ last week. With the completion of that transaction, we've actually now changed our ticker, as you pointed out, to ALOY, Alloy on the NASDAQ, and rebranded the company to be REalloys. So we're very excited to be here on the NASDAQ, very excited for the great things to come. We think this is a great opportunity and a great strategy to be part of.
Again, a very fresh public company to have just about a week of history being a public company. How does this change things as far as future investments and growth for your company and the mining operations that you have underway?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of different areas. First of all, it brings transparency to what we're doing in the sense that it gives us a platform to talk to great people like yourself about all the really exciting things that we're doing and how we're actually strengthening this North American strategic supply chain. The other aspect is we have a relatively modest capital expenditure program because we've been able to build these partnerships of existing assets that are either been in production for a long time, like the Euclid facility in Ohio, or in the case of the SRC, assets that we're providing capital to finalize the completion of. This is different to the multi-year major capital expenditure strategy, which would be more traditional if you wanted to try and build everything from a greenfield perspective. So when we look at, the purpose of being a public company, one of the things that it does is it does allow us to look at, optionality for raising capital, but more importantly, it brings visibility and awareness into what we're doing.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more too about the competitive scene for rare earth companies. We've heard lots of stories over the last year as rare earths have really entered the story in the stock market. And we saw a lot of those stocks go wild in the last year and just see a lot of volatility too. But I think one thing investors are curious about is it's difficult to just lump together any mining company has a rare earth story. Everybody does something unique a little bit. And so I think one key question a lot of investors have is there room for many rare earth companies to do well under the current demands and under this build out of the North American infrastructure?
Yeah, of course, this is a massively growing sector. I mean, the demand for these materials is growing exponentially, particularly when you factor in the need to diversify away from a Chinese-dominated industry. We effectively have to replace a lot of that capacity and then replicate it for new demand that's coming into the market. So our focus is very much on the ability to produce. This is where I think we differentiate from a lot of the other, let's call them developing rare earth companies, for which there's many great companies out there. the ability to be able to be, coming to the market with product by the end of this year is a huge milestone, a huge achievement that we have just in the very near term to be able to achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, such a critical part of the mining story and the infrastructure of building out a secure domestic defense system. Let's talk about how soon do you think in the manufacturing process for the products that we mentioned, the drones, the submarines, even the aircraft that are reliant on these materials, will there be that switch in the supply chain as soon as your products are on the market later this year?
Yeah, well, it's already being implemented from a legislative perspective that, under Title 50, that change needs to happen by 2027 for the defense agencies to be able to receive, and procure equipment. They need to be able to certify that it's free of Chinese materials or non-allied materials. And in order to do that, there really isn't, it's not like there's a whole lot of solutions. We are going to be the primary producer of heavy rare earths in North America in order to enable that. Short of a presidential authorization, that is the only solution that exists today, which is, I think, very exciting.
Yeah, exciting. And there's a lot of movement happening in this entire sector right now. Excited for you again, 1 week into your being a public company. For those who want to look at that ticker again, it's ALOY, a very new chart, very new story for this company. I know we started with a really good look at kind of macro what's happening in this industry, but I don't want to have you leave today without getting your thoughts on the more recent topic of what happened over the weekend in Iran and more of that global geopolitical tension story. I think it's just important to talk about with what's happening specifically this week. Do you expect to see a lot more interest going into exactly what you and your company are doing right now? And I'd just love to hear kind of your thoughts on that overall broader picture of what's happening in the world today.
Well, of course, it's well known that Iran is closely allied with China. And so, I think, what we're going to potentially see is the response from China in relation to what's happening in Iran. And so I think from a rare earth perspective, it's only going to seek to further illuminate the need to diversify away from Chinese supply. Because if this week or next week China decides that, okay, we're not going to supply these materials to, effectively the US or allied nations of the US, then that really has a significant impact on the US and our allies to continue to develop and deploy arms. And so, whilst nobody wants geopolitical turbulence and uncertainty or war in this world, the reality of today is that we need to be able to have the means to be able to protect ourselves, and that includes supplying the materials to make it possible.
Such a great answer and a really important point that all eyes are on this domestic manufacturing of these critical defense supply chains. If you're interested in more stories like this, make sure to check out this video we have from the last couple of weeks interviewing the CEO of a drone company that's doing the exact same thing, bringing that manufacturing process to North America. If you missed that interview, make sure to watch that one too.